How would you describe his personality?
He was German through and through. Oh, if he had his mind made up, it was made up. Now, he could give you a lot of reasons. But, and he didn't argue. He stated his point, and that was it. We never fussed. Even when young Bill came home with a motorcycle, he never raised his voice and he never fussed. He just politely told him that it was a very expensive motorcycle because if he kept it, he would have to pay for his college tuition, his room and board, his medical expenses, his attorney, insurance fees for medical expenses and so forth. And so Bill had to give it up in 2 weeks. And but he never raises his voice. He just a stoic German.
How did you meet Grandpa?
I met him at not the sweet shop, but there was another very popular little restaurant on campus, right off campus, and he was pointed out to me, and I very much liked what I saw. So even though that wasn't my favorite restaurant, I made it my favorite restaurant for the next couple of weeks. And sure enough, he was sitting with Bean Stevens at a table. And of course, I was in the circus. Beans was in the circus. So I walked over and said, "Hi, Beans," knowing I would get introduced to Bill. We had discussed marriage, but at the time I was under contract in Hollywood, Florida, teaching music, and he was still at FSU working on a master's. And I knew that if I was engaged, so I knew that we would eventually get married. But he suddenly calls up and says, "We can get married this Easter break." And I said, "How can we do that?" I said, I'm under contract here. And he said, "Well, they'll let you out of your contract if you ask them." And I said, "But we have no place to live." He said, "No, I've got an apartment. I've got you a job. We get married on Friday. You start work on Monday for the Florida legislature." I said, "Oh." So then I went to look at this apartment. And sure enough, he had an apartment above a garage. And he had all of his friends come in and clean it up. And by that I mean paint it. Everything was battleship gray. The floor in the kitchen, the countertop in the kitchen, the cabinets in the kitchen. But it was clean, but I don't know where they got that paint. Battleship gray. Let's talk, okay. My father wasn't too sure of Bill because he was a Yankee. And especially when the Tampa Tribune headline said, "2 athletes accused of spying for the FBI." And of course, one of them was Bill. So my father comes in, throws the newspaper on the dining room table and says, "See who you're going with?" And naturally, Bill had to hide out at my house for 2 weeks because of all the reporters. He had gotten 2 gold medals from Eva Perón, and then one night, and then the next day, arrested as being a spy. So he had, with a little help from the U.S. government, he and his Chicago friend were released and sent home safely. When Grandpa graduated from Navy Pier, he was going to go straight into the University of Illinois in Champaign. But he was so exceptional in gymnastics that the Big Ten the Big Ten athletic organization changed the rules and said you could no longer transfer from Navy Pier without staying out a year. So he did not want to miss a year, and Dr. Price heard about this, and he contacted Bill immediately, Hartley Price, and said, come to FSU. And he knew that if he got Bill at FSU, other gymnasts would follow, because you want to train with the best. So that's how he got a scholarship at FSU. Well, obviously he was going to pick an athletic major, as far as I know. And he wasn't a very good student until I showed him my report card and asked to see his. And after that, we did a lot of studying together. As I practiced the piano, I would have to listen to him name all the bones of the body, and his grades increased particularly well. He was involved in it not as much as the group, but one of his very best friends, Bean Stevens, that's what we called him, Beans. He was a Theta Chi as well. And Bill only lived in the house, I think, 1 year. And he roomed with one of the football players. And as he's shaving the next day to go to class, one of the regulars asked him, "Oh, where are you from?" They thought he was a stranger because they never saw him. He took his military training with him as a coach. And his little speech was always, there are a lot of Indians in this world, but only a few chiefs. And I am one of the chiefs, and you are the Indians. So they learned very quickly that he meant it. And they respected him for it, and he got good results. So I would say he was an excellent coach and teacher. And I would say he was an excellent parent for that same reason. He didn't allow kids to go crazy like they seem to do today. Well, in 1951, Bill went to the Pan American Games, and we had a very successful meet. He won 2 gold medals. And that night, Eva Perón actually presented him with his gold medals. And the next day, he and one of his Chicago friends, who was a wrestler, they were going to take a little tour. So they started on a train, and Bill said, all of a sudden, he said, "You know, there's army jeeps and everything running alongside the train here." And then pretty soon the train stopped. He says, "They're boarding the train." And they came up to Bill and the wrestler and said, "Would you come with us, please?" And they wanted Bill's film. And Bill said, because the wrestler had asked him to, as a joke, to film him with one of the soldiers with the rifles in front of a factory. And just as a joke, the guy was pointing a rifle at him, and that was it. But when they arrested Bill, they wanted the film. And Bill did not want to give it to him because he had pictures of Bob, the famous pole vaulter, pole vaulting, and he didn't want to give up his film. So when they left him alone, he changed the film. But, of course, there was a 2-way mirror that he missed. So they confiscated his film, and he had to spend the night in jail, a couple of nights in jail. And finally, the American ambassador came and got them, but they weren't allowed to go in the country. They were escorted to the border and dumped. And so, of course, it made big headlines in the United States. And the Tampa Tribune, huge headlines, 2-inch headlines, said, "U.S. Olympians arrested for spying." And my dad comes in the house, throws the paper on the dining room table and says, "See who you're going with?" Well, obviously it didn't go over so well. And when Bill got back to FSU, he was hounded by reporters so much that he drove to my house. And Dad had to put up with him for another few days until things cooled off at FSU.
Sounds.
Grandpa used to travel back and forth to Chicago from holidays, Thanksgiving, Easter, and so forth. And sometimes Gymnast went with him, but sometimes he was alone. And this one particular time, he picked up a hitchhiker. And so they had quite a conversation, and that was the end of it. And then a couple of weeks later, a couple of policemen came to the campus at Florida State and said, "Are you Bill Roetzheim?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Is this your chemistry book?" And Bill said, "Yes." He said, "I've been looking for that book." He said, "Where did you get it?" And they said, "Man, you don't know how lucky you are." He said, "We found it with a hitchhiker." And Bill said, "Oh yeah, I picked up a hitchhiker." And they said, "Well, the hitchhiker you picked up was a serial killer who had killed every single person he had ridden with in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks." And Bill said, "Well, why didn't he kill me?" And they said, "We asked him that. And he said he was going to. But he had such an interesting conversation with you, and by the time all of a sudden Bill said, 'Okay, I have to let you out here, I'm turning.'" He said, "So I just took his book and left." So Bill was very fortunate, very fortunate. I don't know how to answer that, because my life with Grandpa was so special. That man took me all over the world. I shook hands with queens. I visited, the other day I was looking at the temperature in the Tampa Tribune and out in the foreign cities, and I counted. I had visited 44 of them. And this is from a little girl who was just a Plant City country girl, strawberry girl. And even at the end, when Grandpa's memory was bad, I think the thing I miss the most right now, out of his 2 years of passing, is having someone tell me they love me every day, because he did. So I was blessed when I married Grandpa.